Every morning I wake up before the sun rises. The city is still quiet at that hour, and I like that feeling. There are no loud cars, no crowded streets, and no rushing people. Just silence, soft light, and time to breathe. On this particular morning, I decided to start my day at my favorite coffee shop, the small one on the corner near my apartment. I left my home with a light jacket and my headphones in my bag. The air was cool and fresh. As I walked, I could hear birds singing somewhere above me. The streets looked different in the early morning. Everything felt slower, calmer, and more peaceful. I enjoyed each step, letting my thoughts wander without pressure. The coffee shop opened at 6 o'clock, and I arrived a few minutes early. The lights inside were already on, glowing warmly through the glass windows. I stood outside for a moment, watching the steam rise from my breath. Then the door opened, and the familiar smell of coffee welcomed me inside. The shop was quiet, just the way I liked it. Soft music played in the background, something slow and relaxing. Only 2 other people were there. One was a man sitting near the window with a newspaper, and the other was a woman typing on her laptop in the corner. No one spoke. It felt like everyone was enjoying their own peaceful moment. I walked up to the counter and smiled at Anna, the barista. She had worked there for years, and we often exchanged a few kind words in the morning. "Good morning," she said gently. "Good morning," I replied. "The usual, please." She nodded and began making my coffee. I watched her movements, calm, steady, and familiar. The sound of the coffee machine was soft, almost comforting. While waiting, I looked around the shop. The wooden tables, the warm lights, and the small plants on the shelves made the place feel like home. When my coffee was ready, I thanked Anna and chose my favorite seat near the window. I sat down, placed my cup on the table, and wrapped my hands around it. The warmth felt good. Outside, the sky was slowly turning brighter, and the city was beginning to wake up. I took my first sip and closed my eyes for a moment. The taste was perfect. In that quiet morning, with coffee in my hands and no rush in my heart, I felt peaceful. I didn't know it yet, but this simple morning was about to change the way I saw small moments in life. As I sat by the window, slowly drinking my coffee, I watched the street outside come to life. A few cars passed by, their headlights still on. A man walked his dog, and a woman hurried past with a bag in her hand. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere important, but inside the coffee shop, time felt different. It moved gently, without stress. I opened my bag and took out a small notebook. I always carried it with me, but I didn't often write in it. Most days, I told myself I was too busy or too tired. That morning felt different. I picked up my pen and stared at the blank page, not knowing exactly what to write. Sometimes silence gives you space to think, and sometimes it reminds you of things you've been avoiding. I started writing about my morning routine, about waking up early and enjoying quiet moments. The words came slowly, but honestly. I realized how rare these calm mornings had become in my life. Most of the time, I rushed from one place to another, thinking about what I had to do next instead of where I was. A soft sound pulled my attention away from the notebook. Someone had taken the seat across from me. I looked up and saw an elderly man with kind eyes and gray hair. He smiled politely and held up his coffee cup. "Do you mind if I sit here?" he asked. "Not at all," I replied. He sat down carefully and placed his cup on the table. For a moment, we sat in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It felt natural, like we both understood that silence didn't always need words. "You come here often?" he asked after a while. "Yes," I said. "I like the quiet mornings." He nodded. "Me too. They remind me to slow down." His words stayed with me. Slow down. It sounded simple, but it was something I often forgot to do. We talked a little more, about the weather, the coffee, and how busy the city had become. Nothing deep, yet somehow meaningful. After a few minutes, he finished his drink and stood up. "Have a good day," he said warmly. You too, I replied. When he left, I went back to my notebook. I wrote about the short conversation and how a stranger's words could stay with you longer than expected. Outside, the sun was fully up now, and more people were entering the coffee shop. The quiet was slowly fading. I took the last sip of my coffee and looked around once more. The shop felt alive now, filled with voices and movement. Still, I carried the calm of the early morning inside me. I closed my notebook, knowing this quiet moment would stay with me long after I left the coffee shop. The coffee shop was no longer as quiet as before, but I stayed in my seat. I liked watching the change. New customers came in, greeting Anna at the counter, ordering their drinks and checking their phones. The sound of cups touching saucers and soft conversations filled the room. Even with the noise, I still felt calm. I opened my notebook again and reread what I had written. The words felt simple, but they were true. Writing helped me understand my thoughts better. I realized that I didn't often give myself time to listen to my own feelings. Life moved so fast, and I usually moved with it without asking myself why. A young woman sat at the table next to mine. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. She ordered a strong coffee and sighed deeply as she sat down. I noticed how she stared at her phone, scrolling without really looking. Something about her reminded me of myself on most mornings. I wondered how many people came to this coffee shop carrying invisible worries. Everyone had a story, a reason for being tired, anxious, or quiet. Sitting there, I felt connected to these strangers in a strange way. We were all sharing the same space, even if we didn't share our words. Anna walked past my table and smiled. Busy morning today, she said. Yes, I replied, but it still feels nice. She agreed and went back to work. Watching her, I thought about how some people could stay calm even during busy moments. Maybe peace didn't depend on silence, but on how we carried ourselves inside. I finished writing and closed my notebook. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about my to-do list. I wasn't worried about the future or regretting the past. I was simply there, in that moment. The elderly man from earlier crossed my mind. His words echoed again. Slow down. I understood them better now. Slowing down didn't mean stopping everything. It meant paying attention, being present, and allowing small moments to matter. I checked the time and realized I should leave soon. Still, I didn't feel rushed. I stood up, put my notebook back into my bag, and took one last look around the coffee shop. The place that had felt so quiet earlier now felt warm and alive. As I walked toward the door, I felt lighter. Nothing in my life had changed on the outside, but something inside me had shifted. That quiet morning had given me a small reminder. Sometimes peace is waiting for us in the simplest places, if we choose to notice it. I stepped outside the coffee shop, and the cool morning air touched my face again. The street was much busier now. Cars moved faster, people walked quickly, and the calm feeling of earlier seemed far away. Still, I carried something peaceful inside me as I walked down the sidewalk. I didn't put on my headphones right away. Instead, I listened to the sounds around me. Footsteps, traffic, voices, and the wind moving between buildings. Normally, these sounds felt loud and tiring. That morning, they felt real and alive. I realized that slowing down had changed how I experienced everything. As I walked, my mind returned to my everyday life. Work deadlines, responsibilities, messages waiting on my phone. None of those things had disappeared, but they didn't feel as heavy as before. The quiet morning had reminded me that I was more than my schedule. I reached a small park near my apartment and decided to sit for a few minutes. I chose a bench under a tree and placed my bag beside me. The leaves moved gently above my head, and sunlight touched the ground in soft patterns. I opened my notebook once more. This time I wrote about gratitude. I wrote about being thankful for warm coffee, kind strangers, and moments of silence. I wrote about how easy it was to forget these things when life felt busy. Writing made me feel honest with myself, as if I was finally listening. A mother walked past with her child, holding his small hand. The child laughed loudly, pointing at a bird on the ground. I smiled without thinking. Simple joy existed everywhere, I realized. We just didn't always notice it. After a while, I stood up and continued walking home. I felt ready to start my day. Not rushed, not tired, just ready. When I reached my apartment, I placed my notebook on my desk instead of hiding it away. I wanted to keep writing, to keep paying attention. Before starting my work, I made myself a promise. I promised to protect these quiet moments whenever I could, even if it was only for a few minutes each day. Life didn't need to be loud all the time. Peace was something I could choose. I looked out the window one last time before sitting down. The city moved quickly, just as it always did. But inside my small room, and inside my heart, the morning remained quiet. That evening, after a long day of work, I found myself thinking about the coffee shop again. The day had been busy, full of emails, meetings, and small problems that needed quick answers. I felt tired, but not in the usual way. Instead of feeling empty, I felt calm, as if the quiet morning had given me enough strength to carry me through the day. I prepared a simple dinner and sat by the window as the sky slowly turned dark. City lights appeared one by one, and the noise outside softened. I reached for my notebook once more. Writing in the morning had felt natural, and now it felt necessary. I wanted to remember the feeling of that day. I wrote about the coffee shop, the warm cup in my hands, and the strangers who had shared the space with me. I wrote about the elderly man and his gentle reminder to slow down. His words felt like a gift, something small but powerful. Sometimes people entered our lives for just a moment, yet they left something meaningful behind. As I wrote, I understood that the quiet morning had not been special because of where I was, but because of how present I had been. I hadn't rushed. I hadn't checked my phone every minute. I had listened, observed, and allowed myself to simply be. That was the real lesson. I closed my notebook and placed it carefully on the table. I knew I would return to the coffee shop again, maybe many times. But even if I didn't, I could still create quiet moments wherever I was. On a bus, in a park, or even in my own room. Peace wasn't a place. It was a habit. Before going to bed, I set my alarm a little earlier than usual. I smiled to myself. I wanted more mornings like that. Slow, simple, and honest. I wanted to begin my days with intention, not stress. As I turned off the lights and lay down, I felt grateful. A quiet morning at a coffee shop had reminded me of something important. Life doesn't always ask us to do more. Sometimes it asks us to notice more. And tomorrow morning I plan to listen,